Did you know that on the Sony A7Rv there's a feature that takes your not so small 61 megapixel image all the way to an even bigger 240 megapixel image? Recently I've been using that feature and I have a few things I'd like to show you. So in this video I'm going to show you exactly what that feature is and how it works. But more importantly, let you know if there's any limitations to it, what you should be aware of when using it, and answering the question of whether the overall result is worth all of the extra effort. The Sony A7Rv has a beautiful 61 megapixel sensor. More than enough for pretty much any situation, let's be real. However, what if you want to get the very best out of that sensor, unlocking not only every ounce of resolution, but also color reproduction? Inside this huge Sony menu, there's an option to enable the Pixel Shift multi-shoot mode. In this mode, you've got two options. You've got 4 images or 16 images. However, something to be aware of is the 4 image option doesn't actually give you a larger resolution. Only the 16 image mode does. The 4 image mode does increase the color resolution though, so could it actually be worth considering using the 4 image mode over the 16 image mode if you don't need all of the 240 megapixels? Color resolution refers to the level of detail and accuracy representing color within an image. You could easily swap out resolution for reproduction. But hang on, before you run off and start using these new photo modes, you need to know how to use them properly. Obviously, first you need to determine whether you're shooting with 4 images or 16 images, and once you've done that, just set your camera up as normal, making sure you focus and expose properly. And don't forget, because we're taking multiple photos, we want to lock that white balance. No longer do we want to be in auto white balance, set it to something which suits the scene. However, you are going to need an extra piece of equipment to make sure these photos are successful. Both of these modes will move the camera sensor around slightly between taking the 4 or 16 photos. So you're going to want to keep the camera in the same place whilst taking the photo. Ideally, anytime you use any pixel shift technology in your cameras, regardless of which camera it is, really you should be using a tripod. Obviously, the stabilization in cameras like the A7Rv is really good these days, but regardless, between taking 4 or maybe even 16 photos, the camera is going to move, the camera isn't going to be able to detect that, and you aren't really going to get the true representation of a 240 megapixel image. The more movement your camera experiences whilst taking these photos, the higher the chances of having any kind of artifacts, even to the point of reducing the sharpness of the image. Therefore, getting rid of the entire point of using a pixel shift drive mode. Once you've taken the photos and got your files, you're going to need to do a little bit more to them than just your standard photo editing. Because you have 4 or 16 images, you're going to need to merge them into one. Now, there's a couple of ways I know of which will allow you to do this. One of them is Sony's own Imaging Edge, which is fairly simple to use and does most of the hard work for you. Just make sure that when it comes around to merging your photos, you tick the stabilization option, as this will help the software rectify any problems if anything's moved in your scene or if your camera's moved slightly as well. And I always export as an ARQ to make sure that I have the most flexibility when it comes to editing in Lightroom. Now, the larger process of merging 16 photos into one will take a fair bit of time. And as far as I'm aware, you can only do this to one group of photos at a time, but don't quote me on that. Once you've exported it, you can just treat it as any normal photo, bring it into Lightroom or Catch One and begin your editing. But those 80 to 90 seconds of processing the photo, plus all the time you need to take the actual photo in the composition, isn't the only drawbacks of using this feature. The files from the A7Rv are already fairly big, but when you start combining 16 of them in a TIFF format, they get even bigger. And with a single ARQ file, before you even put it into Lightroom, you're looking at almost 2 gigabytes. And due to the larger file size and more resolution, you may find Lightroom or Capture One to be a little bit slow in rendering and processing any of your photos. However, once you've done all the editing, processing, and exporting, you do end up with a pretty big photo. It's that big, it can easily be printed at 63 inches wide by 42 inches large while still maintaining 300 DPI. It's pretty impressive, I've got to say. But is all of the extra time, storage, and effort to take a photo 4 times larger than normal going to give you an image 4 times better in quality? The 4-shot mode that I've already mentioned, I'm in 2 minds. There is a difference between the single shot RAW file and then the 4-shot mode, and you can see for yourself. On the left hand side we have the original RAW file, just the single shot mode, and then on the right hand side we have the 4 images merged together. And you'll notice that the biggest difference between these 2 images is in the bottom portion of the photo. The oranges seem to be a little bit more red, and there seems to be also less contrast in the overall image. And through some of the other photos I took, I noticed a similar thing as well. I can't say which one of the 2 I actually prefer, however the multi-shot photo which has been merged together does seem to be a little bit more natural looking. Now, would I really go out of my way to use this photo mode and add to my workflow? You could say that if you're wanting to take technically the perfect photo, then you would. But me personally, honestly, probably not, but maybe sometimes. I'm not going to disregard the feature, but for the last year or so I've owned the camera, at no point have I ever thought, I really wish my photos looked different. Now, when it comes to the larger 16 multi-shot images, you're obviously going to get a larger image. And your first impressions will be like, well, that's going to be better. But is it really? When I've been looking at the photos, I do feel like there is a decrease of sharpness across the image. I've tried my very hardest to keep the settings the same whilst taking the photos and making sure that the camera doesn't move. But when you look closely, there is a difference. There's also the same color difference in the photo from the single RAW file, the same as what we got in the full multi-shot mode. However, with there being 16 photos, you do have to be careful about any artifacts being present in the image. In this one particular photo, for instance, if you zoom into where the mist is going over the valley, you can see a really weird pattern in certain parts of the cloud formation. But when you look at the single RAW file and then the full multi-shot photo, that pattern isn't there. Now, this is probably down to Sony's software not being accurate all of the time. And you can use other photos to stack and merge your software, Photoshop being one of them. And when I've tried Photoshop and compared the results between the two pieces of software, I did get varied results. Photoshop did give some good results in certain situations, whereas Sony software was better in other situations. There doesn't seem to be a one-size-fits-all solution. One thing I've noticed whilst using the Pixel Shift Drive mode on the A7Rv is that sometimes it makes a really weird noise. It almost sounds like the camera's humming, and at first, I actually thought it was broken. I have no idea why it does it, but it seems to only do it when you're in the 16 multi-shoot mode. So perhaps it's the sensor and the stabilization moving around, trying to make sure that everything's as stable as possible. So if you hear it, you don't need to worry about it, it's completely normal. Overall though, would I actually recommend the process? Obviously, if you feel like going all out and achieving the highest pixel count for all of your photos, then it's a no-brainer. However, the scene that you're taking the photo of and really the general environment that you're in will dictate the successfulness of the whole process. Whether you decide to do this on a regular basis is entirely up to you, but if you haven't tried it yet, then go try it and let me know how you get on. I'd love to hear your input. However, on the flip side of the ridiculously large 240 megapixels, you have the 61 megapixels, which isn't always needed either. If you want to know why, then watch this video right here. However, if you want to know the perfect trio of prime lenses for your Sony camera, then watch this right here. I'll see you there, latest.